What is up? I changed the name again, guys.
I noticed that.
This week we are three martial arts geeks, number 8, and
Only
I think it's fair, right?
I
Oh
like
yeah.
it.
Yeah, it's 100% fair. Everybody that's joining us already, there's a lot, and that's cool. Thank you for coming in. Um, Rich Chow and Mallory Woods and Robin Black, we get together once a week and we talk about art. We like violent art, fighting art. Um, Maybe we'll have a guest. We have had one so far. I keep promising guests, and we had an OG that's coming next week. I also sent Glover to share as coach, the pit master. I sent him sorry. I sent him a invitation to come today. Of course, his guy just won a belt, world title at 42, so that would be super cool. Mal, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I came back from sunny Florida from 80 degrees to 40, so that wasn't a good wager. I did want to say that I came back to completely no internet. Some were doing, had some people doing work around the house, and I came back to nothing. So I missed all of last week's fights. I just watched them today. Finally got internet back and watched the replay, and I was super happy for Glover. I've met him before. Such a super nice guy. How could you not be happy for a guy that happened for you? You can see, just a lot of emotion everywhere. So that was really cool to see. But glad to be back. Glad to be here with you guys.
Rich, what are you saying?
Yeah, this is one of the highlights of the week for me. Happy to be back with you guys. I am 42, and I train a few times a week, and I'm just absolutely destroyed. I cannot imagine being at that elite level, championship level, being one of the best guys in the world at this age. Props to Glover, a very good dude.
Really good dude.
Know him personally, and yeah, just what a feel good story. Yeah, this is a young man's game, and yeah, just yeah,
So
that's very cool.
I will pass on a story that Coach Hackelman told me. I think he told Mel, were you in for that when he and we had Hackelman on our Bellator live stream,
Yes.
and he was like, yeah, man, you know what? So it's his story too, right? And he hasn't talked a lot about it. If you're kicking around, did I send you the link? I'll send you the link. So Coach Hackelman was like, I was literally going to quit. And of course, people say that all the time, usually fighters. But Hackelman's like, that's it. I'm closing my doors. I'm not coaching fighters anymore. I'm quitting. And he goes, Anthony Robbins called me up, right? And he invited me over to his house, and he gave me shit. I'm like, what? Anthony Robbins, like the motivational speaker? He's like, yeah, we're friends. Like, and I'm like, okay, wait, like, like, there's parts of this story we're kind of missing. But he goes, well, anyways, Anthony Robbins calls me up and he says, you can't quit on Glover and and he calls me a fucking pussy, and and I'm like, wait a second, you've got Anthony Robbins, the motivational speaker. You're sitting in his backyard, 6 feet apart, as he's yelling at you and insulting you and calling you names because you're going to quit coaching. But his point was, you helped these guys get here. As long as they are still doing this, they count on you. And so it's strange that story, that Hackelman story, isn't public, but he doesn't do a lot of sitting and chatting with people who aren't his friends. So hopefully he will join us today and he can tell us about that. But it's funny, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I hope he can come on. I have a good Glover Hackelman story as well. Hopefully he'll come on and we can share it. Yeah, here's to the old guys,
Yep.
For us.
So we don't get super into current affairs unless it's something that attracts us. We're not doing it just because that's what, how you're supposed to produce shows about fighting. But here's some of the things we were touching base on text this week we wanted to talk about. What is the best gym to train at? I'll go through the list of things we jotted down. And I get this a lot. Like, say a friend of mine who's a journalist was like, in Toronto, he goes, what's the best jiu-jitsu gym to train at in Toronto? We'll talk about that. And then when you do train, what should you start with? Like, what kind of, you want to do karate or wrestling? Like, what should you start with? Everybody's got some good stories of great coaches or weird coaches or whatever. I'm sure you guys do. If you do start training, like, what are you after? and then the bigger philosophical purpose of when you're training martial arts. Let's start here, guys. Mal, what is the best gym to train at?
Well, this is not going to be controversial in any way. You tend to go with what you hear. This is their fourth fighter out of such gym. So if I had to, a gun to my head, I had to be picking this. I'm going to this top 10. It's pick your poison wherever location is at. These guys always seem to be in the mix of everything.
Yeah. So I gotta interrupt you, Mal. I gotta interrupt you. Doesn't matter who you name. For everybody, when they're starting martial arts or even getting back to it or whatever, and you don't train, the best gym to train at is 100% the one that is closest to your house.
Also
that is the best gym to train at, and I'll tell you why. The most important variable for developing as a martial artist is attendance. The number one variable, if you want to go from white belt to something you want to improve, the number one variable is attendance, and you will go more to the one near your house. Is this am I making a fair point?
Very fair point. I'll say as far as just the average person wanting to go in and learn, I get asked this all the time, right? Hey, the best. I'm like, you don't need the best. You need the right one for you. Go take a free class. Go make sure it's the right environment for you. You don't need the best. You're a fucking beginner. You can learn from, as far as jujitsu, it's like, well, who's the best? I go, it doesn't matter. Like, you can learn. You have so much to learn. You don't need the best right now.
Yeah.
You need the right environment for you. I'll use my environment, for example. Earlier I mentioned I gave away my age. I'm 42. I train with some other guys that are a little bit older. We don't hurt each other. We have our crew. There's a really good culture where I train. I don't want to be in the comp class with a bunch of young 20-year-olds getting ready for the worlds. That's not the right environment for me. So I always say yes, attendance, but I think that goes hand in hand with the right culture. If you're in the right place. So it was I like how you had best in quotes, right? It's like, if you're a beginner, unless you're a prize fighter, you don't need to be in the best. And even then, when we get into that further, even the best is, it's tricky. I think people need the right environment more and that goes. So I guess I'm defining the best as in the right place for you, the best place for you, not necessarily these are the most accomplished guys that have the most titles and whatnot.
And Mal, I apologize. I did not contextualize it at all, but I did that on purpose, thinking that anybody would start to describe the actual best, because the discussion of the actual best is a very difficult discussion. But yeah, you're right. As soon as you put it in quotes, you're like, wait a second, the best for whom, right?
It makes complete sense. And one of the things is you're right. And it's funny because I've given that advice before. People say, well, I want my kid to study whatever. And like, well, you got to go someplace you feel comfortable and that you're going to go to.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I was saying the one closest to your house, of course, is extremely general, because what if the guy over there is a terrible teacher and you hate it? That's no good either, right? So it's a super general. But yeah, like and a lot of times, let's say I want to, let's say that we've been saying we want to learn piano for a long time. We said it 2 years ago and we said it 6 months ago. Why haven't we learned piano? Well, there's going to be something that's stopping us. And sometimes, like, well, what's the best gym? Or I don't know if I want to do jujitsu or what. Like, the key to any kind of process of skill development is beginning it. Like you must start, right? Starting is easy because all you have to do is go begin, but it's hard because you have to decide to start.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw this one out there at you guys. This is the classic. You got a buddy, he's always asking you questions about fights, about training, and they always use this line, I'm going to get in shape first. And train. And to me, that's like the biggest crock, right? It's like, then you're never going to train.
Get your ass. There's always going to be something. There's always going to be something.
Go and have fun. But, that's the classic line, right? Is, it's like, I'm going to do a free camp. So
just to get ready,
to get in shape, to get ready. And I'm like, it doesn't work that way, but whatever.
No, but hey, it's ultimately we're probably a little afraid or insecure or uncertain or just we don't know, right? But and I get it all the time. We get in podcasts, get in chat. What's the best martial arts to train? Are you just continuing to ask questions that in the asking of the question, it is inaction disguised as action? If we talk about something long enough, it may trick us into thinking it's a thing. But actually, we are not taking action because we're spending all this time talking. So you just go down the street, pick a place and train. You can always change later. You can always go somewhere later. But that will bring us to this. Mal, your first martial art was Taekwondo or karate?
Taekwondo.
Yeah. Rich, what was yours?
Jiu-jitsu.
Really? Yeah. Taekwondo for me too, Mal. So we win. 2-1.
2 versus 1.
Yeah. But so this is another one of those questions that comes up. And this one you'll see a lot from a 13-year-old who says, I want to do martial, I want to fight or whatever. Which should I do first? What should I do first, striking or grappling? What are you guys' thoughts?
Well, I'm biased.
Yeah.
So let me make the argument. It's the classic one. Nothing new here, fellas. But it's the best for self-defense because of the natural clinch and grappling scenarios that occur out on the street. In the
world.
Yeah. Just basic self-defense. You're going to end up in a clinch, and to be able to dictate and control that scenario and escape from there. I'm actually a big fan of, like, at that point, get out of there. You're not going to stand your ground and try and fight. Like, if you can run, right? Like, you want to avoid that if at all possible. And I think the grappling scenario is one where you can neutralize the situation, hopefully, and then just do what you got to do to get safe. Yeah. So it's probably a little easier to learn from that standpoint.
Physically,
I think with striking, it's tricky because a lot of people don't like to learn because it's fun to hit something, right? Hit pads, hit a bag, but when you're sparring or doing drills and someone's hitting back, I think that can throw some people off, perhaps. I mean, you guys tell me. I mean, what do you encounter with people that tell you, like, man, I just don't, striking's tough for me?
Mal, what's your general thought? You started doing striking, so you intuitively, sorry, I'm turning off this loud thing. Intuitively, your answer could be, why don't you start with punching and kicking, right?
I would agree with that, but also one of the things is that the more you start to know and the more you start to learn, like, for example, let's say you learn how to do a front kick and it's like, okay, great, this is wonderful, I can do this. But the more you start to learn, you also start to learn when not to do those things. Like, for example, if you're practicing in a class and the instructor says, kick high, you want to kick up the head level. And then, of course, here comes the real, well, that wouldn't work on the street guy. I'm like, yeah, no, you're not kicking anybody in the head on the street. No, don't do that. What if it's icy? What if it's an uneven ground? And he's, oh, I never thought about that. Wait a minute. Now you start to understand that I have a little bit of knowledge about maybe one strike or 1 or 2 strikes, but also the knowledge of when not to use it. So, and then also agreeing exactly what Rich says, that you're hitting those pads and you're sounding great. And then all of a sudden, when the pads can hit back, it changes the game a little bit. It changes a lot of things. But one of the things that I wanted to say, so we had a guy that would teach jujitsu. He would come out of the karate school and he would teach jujitsu. So a lot of times after we would spar, we'd stay around and we would roll with him. And I told him one day, I said, I am just not comfortable. You drag me down here and I'm worried about everything you're going to grab and bend and turn and me tapping. He says, you have to understand, as comfortable as you feel on your feet, that's how comfortable I feel on the ground. As uncomfortable as I feel on my feet, that's me. It's different worlds. So, and it made a lot of sense. And then also just, to me, grappling just seemed like there's so many different scenarios. And I realized at the beginning how much I really don't know about that. Like, I was aware kind of my space in this little universe. Right away.
Yeah. So both really, really good thoughts from both angles, and all that's true. You're right, Mal. Whatever it is you're doing, if you do a lot of something, the unknown of the other thing, it doesn't matter which way you went. But I always think of this when I go to the gym. So I used to, a a lot of different gyms. Even just in the last month, I've been in 4 or 5 different gyms training with different people, which I love. I just love it. I also have my favorite coaches. We'll talk about that when we get to coach stories, which is next. But we can do whatever we want. We don't have structure. But there was one gym I used to train at, Extreme Couture Toronto, and I always really loved training there, and I loved all the people there and stuff, and I loved the environment. And I used to be able to, they have a big floor, and they would simultaneously have classes, and there would be like the Muay Thai or kickboxing guys over there, and then there'd be the jiu-jitsu or the wrestling guys over there. And at the very beginning of class, I always remember like I'd sit there and watch, and the jiu-jitsu, the kickboxing guys are moving around, doing stuff, throwing knees, circling, and then the jiu-jitsu guys like spread out on the floor, like stretching, like kind of like chill, like slapping hands, talking. And something about that always said to me, if I was new walking in there, one of these two things would appeal to me. And the mistake, I think, is thinking one is better than the other just because you like it better. Like somebody might say, oh, the kickboxing guys, obviously they're better athletes. None of that's true. This is just a bias. But if you look over and go, what are those guys doing? They're sitting around. Half of them seem stoned. They're wearing pajamas. And it seems really interesting. I'm going to go hang out with those guys. I bet you they're smart and interesting and a little crafty. Or you see these kind of, sweaty, intense guys over there. Which one appeals to you more, right? And naturally, those two things. And if you're a kickboxing guy, you think, well, everybody's will be more attracted to that. That's not at all true. And if you're a jiu-jitsu guy, you're like, why are those guys tuckering themselves out when I could choke them all out? One of those two areas will attract your attention more, I find.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you're going to gravitate towards that, personal preference, your personal style. I think even to take it a step further, like your personal attributes, physical attributes, right? Mm-hmm. Like the short, stocky guy is a grappler. He's kind of built for that. And the tall, lanky guy, I mean, look, striking it's way, it's meant for the long, lean, lanky guy, right? It just looks better. It just was meant, for that body type. So I think that factors in as well. That can help you. But hey, as far as if you're a aspiring fighter, remember we had Dan on not that long ago, and he was like, I want the best athlete, and we're going to teach him.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, true. And but even that, like, oh God, that's a whole conversation for another day. We could bring some, human physiology and strength and conditioning coach, which would be somebody fun for us to have. But what is the best athlete?
Yeah.
The guy who runs 100 meters the fastest is very different than the guy who runs 1600. The fastest, the guy who throws a javelin is very,
who's going to get gas after a minute and needs 3 minutes to recover. But that 1 minute is going to be hell for you to deal with, right? Like, it's a great question.
The truth is, again, if this question creates any kind of analysis paralysis in you, the answer is just pick one. Pick one. Like if you're sitting around wondering or thinking or not taking action because you don't know, just start. Now,
let me add this to the conversation. This is something, this is an expression that we've used before. It's very hard to teach a grown man how to wrestle. So this is, again, for a conversation around, guys that want to fight, right? Competitive guys. So what that means is, it's easier, and we've seen this formula play out. It's, not all the time, but I think there's a lot of success stories here. It's easier to teach a wrestler how to strike than it is a striker how to wrestle, because that, the body mechanics, the muscle memory. So you can't teach a grown man how to wrestle. It's a real thing. I've seen it enough where, that's where the guys get jammed up. It's just too much. If you take guys that have been wrestling since they were, kids, they have this natural instinct and flow and muscle memory. You teach those guys how to kickbox, You got DC.
Yeah, well, just this weekend, like Chandler and Usman. Usman's knocked out 3 guys of his last 4, and in the 12 fights before that, he had no knockouts and 10 decisions.
Yeah.
Suddenly, the day woke up, and I got a Chandler breakdown on my Instagram right now. Literally, the way he drives in, and I was telling Rich about it today when we were chatting about art. When he knocked out Ben Henderson from southpaw, his right knee forward, driving his knee with a penetration step with a punch. His knee doesn't care what you call that. His skeleton, his nervous system, his skeletal muscular system, none of it. All it knows is I've been driving my knee in with my right leg forward since I was 6 years old, because that's the same step he's been doing to penetrate in on a double leg takedown.
Yeah.
Like, his body has been doing some version of this so long that when you actually just teach him the mechanics of it, the physical body is all. And and as you were saying that, Rich, I was like, is this true? There's so few of these so few generalizations that are actually true. But is it easier to teach a wrestler how to box? And the way to answer that correctly is using what you referenced with Dan Lambert the other day.
Several on both sides. Go ahead.
But is what you said of Lambert. Give me the best athlete.
Yeah.
And the wrestlers are often such good athletes that's the answer to why we can teach them to strike. That general super athlete.
Yeah, and I just look. Obviously, there are guys who have made the transition successfully from the kickboxing world. Izzy. Currently, Crow Cop, amongst other guys that have made the transition. But there are a lot. In my experience, that quote has proven to be accurate more often than not. Very difficult. You come in, you have to deal with all these variables. How we talked about how these amazing strikers can get into MMA and get knocked out by guys who are not on their level because of all the variables. They're damn worried about a takedown. Their mind, just gets caught up and confused with all the different positions and the techniques, and then you're totally out of your element. But how do you explain Gokhan Saki, right, getting knocked out? Joe Schilling, these guys are getting knocked out from guys that they would probably beat in boxing and striking, because when you start throwing in and they're not getting taken down and submitted, like I said, they're getting knocked out. Wrestling is really throwing it all off, right?
Yeah. And the wrestler has so Jay makes a great point. The will that is demanded of you in the wrestling rooms, of will to persevere and stuff, carries over when you're learning to do other aspects of it. But also, Rich, to your point, it's one, the threats that I'm offering as the wrestler help, but 2, my physicality has made me hit harder faster than somebody who started kickboxing or whatever only 2 years ago, as I did if I'm the great wrestler, right? But Izzy was a good example, because Izzy doesn't just move his feet like Wonder Boy, and Wonder Boy's a good example too. Yeah. Wonder Boy stopped plenty of Tyron Woodley takedowns in those fights. Yeah, he knows how to wrestle. Yeah,
but they have their defensive wrestling, and it's better, I think, because there's so many different positions, right? In wrestling, as you mentioned, Mal, right? Like the grappling scenarios are infinite. Mm-hmm. So I think the more you try to cram in there and teach them, the harder it is, right? Like they lose that natural instinct, right? And the guys that figure it out, they just have a couple things, right? Hey, I'm going to get out of here. This is what I'm going to do. But you start putting too much information.
Mm-hmm. Information overload.
I saw that with a few guys who are like, they were better off not trying to learn all that stuff because their natural fighting instinct was so good. Now you got them thinking, okay, stop. Okay, pummel, get my underhook. Mm-hmm. All right, it's just, they stopped becoming this natural fighter, and they started just trying to break it down too much and then slowing them down.
In a lot of cases,
in the fight, okay, what am I supposed to do? Coaches tell me, and we drilled this scenario, and all of a sudden it's like, oh man, this guy.
Right. It's
worse. All of this made it worse.
I think that would say they interrupt the natural flow state of things. It's one of the things that's interesting, and I'll find myself doing this. I get an elevator, say I'm in an office building, right? And I look where I stand. And then some part of my brain says, okay, now if you had to take out these three people, what would you do? Where you're standing at, what they look like and everything. And as you become more fluent in your art, things start to change. Like, for example, you don't throw a punch and say, okay, what's next? Hey, your leg says, hey, I'm here available to throw. You can throw me. But then what do you do? And then, but as you get better, that just happens. You know that once you throw this technique, the next one that you can throw potentially, if there's an opening, is right there. And the ability to see that and not, like you're not throwing something that's not going to hit. And that's what I imagine, when you're chaining all that stuff for wrestling, does agree. Depending on where it goes, or the grappling contest, depending on where it goes, is depending on what you go next. Like they gave up this position and you go and you chain that and you go from there. But like you said, if you get to a point where so much is happening, so much is coming at the brain can only process so much at a time.
We're going to keep all this going, but actually, where is it? But we were talking about, and Mal, as you were saying this, you made me think of Boss Rutten. You really did. And that isn't just the setup for the next thing. I actually thought Boss has told me before that when he was learning to grapple, that he just thought in principles. So it wasn't like get underneath, do this thing. It'd be like drive his head to the mat. And then when he comes up, lift his chin up. And those two principles will go a long way when you're fighting. Drive the head down or drive the head up. Or I remember chatting with Kelvin Gastelum one day, and one of my breakdowns, I was talking about a very simple principle: keep the head lower than the hips, his head. And I remember him saying that. He's like, "Hey, I learned that when I was in 7 or 8 years old wrestling.
Wow.
Keep the head lower than the hips, right? Some of these principles are better than pummel under, turn the hip, move sideways, get your head under his chin. That's just too much shit."
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I've experienced a breakthrough later on in life with learning martial arts with concepts and principles, as opposed to learning a bunch of random techniques and trying to string them together. It doesn't work. It's nowhere near as effective unless you got a total stud who's just able to, naturally do it. But for a long time, it was like, all right, you're learning this, you're learning that, but it's not part of a system or a concept or principles, right? And then you get caught up in the one technique to another, and you're screwed.
So before we continue, you reminded me, and I'm going to text John Danaher. We'll ask him to join us one day because his principles are so, obviously he's brilliant, super brilliant. But when I watch and consume his teaching, it's so principle oriented. You're
learning a concept. He's not teaching you random moves and then go out there and put them together. No, it's all connected, right?
Yeah. So, Mal, when you said you reminded me, when I said you describing that reminded me of Boss Rutten explaining, it wasn't a setup. It really then it reminded me. We actually talked last week about watching, a vintage fight, right? Do you have a Boss Rutten fight handy anywhere that we can watch? And do we know when it is from? Oh, I think we do, right?
I do believe I have that set up. Let me see here. This looks like it was from, according to this is Minoru Suzuki versus Boss Rutten. I don't know if the date is right.
1994.
July 6th. 95 is 94. I think you're right.
Yeah. July 6, 1994. Minoru Suzuki, of course, was the creator of Pancrase with Funaki. They were elite genius martial artists who were also pro wrestlers and pro wrestling fanatics. And early Pancrase was there. They called it hybrid wrestling. It was their interpretation of saying, let's do pro wrestling, but make it real fighting. Right? Which is so crazy.
Yeah, it's almost like what we're seeing now with the combat grappling that Eddie's doing, kind of in that spirit of, trying to avoid all the head trauma, getting punched in the head. I mean, it slaps, right? And so, but you still have submissions, you still have cool grappling, and then adding the escapes in pro wrestling, right? I think you were allowed X amount of escapes per match. Like the Pancrase rules are actually pretty cool. I'd love to see it today with some of the older guys.
Yeah. So crazy. So Boss's first fight his fighting began in Pancrase in 1993. Think of that, right? So his third fight in Pancrase was against Funaki, who was the other creator, and Boss lost. And Boss has told me some of these stories, but we'll save them for when we get Boss on the podcast. But so then that was in January of 1994 at what they called Pancrash 1, Pancrash, like a car crash. Mm-hmm. And then later that year, after Boss fought five times that year, in his fourth fight of the year, he now faced Suzuki, the other creator of Pancrase. So let's put this on.
All right.
And we don't need sound or have it quiet. I don't know if you can have that option.
I already muted it, so sound will not go out. And here we go.
So yeah, this was posted in 95, but it's actually from 94. I'll get rid of that little thing on the bottom that will get in the way.
So Pancrase and the UFC same year, right?
Yeah. So if you look at how different this looked, Boss was a Dutch kickboxer, and he didn't know anything about. Did it freeze? There it is. And he didn't know anything really about grappling, in his words. It's freezing for me. I don't know if it's freezing for you.
Oh, I stopped it.
Okay.
I did stop it. I thought you said freeze.
Okay, great. Yeah. You can freeze it, sure. And if you watch, Suzuki is like, bouncing around and showing all these things. Yeah, look at Boss about to kick. Look, so, and now on the ground, right? So Boss literally didn't know, as he would describe it, anything about this. So now you're here fighting on the other side of the ocean in a fighting sport that you don't know anything about this particular thing, and that's called a can opener. And you see a perfect place to pause it. See Boss's legs opened. Rich, old school can opener.
Yeah, open the guard. Yeah.
Didn't we see that just this weekend with Glover using that in round one?
Actually, let me throw this thought in. It actually came from Danaher. We were talking about John, at least the way George told me about it. So George, when he fought Carlos Condit had a really, really dangerous guard, and attacked from there, and they prepared for it. And the way George told it to me, at least back in the day, was that Danaher said, well, we'll use the can opener. And George, and that's this from 1994. So if we look at the flow of history, 1994, I'm in somebody's guard. At that time, the legs being closed around me is a bad thing. They can attack me from there, and they have four limbs, and they've segmented out half of your body. So Boss's, in theory, even though Boss was inexperienced, Boss's 2 legs and 2 arms are in play to attack only the top half of Suzuki's body. So he segmented the body. So he wants to open the guard and you look there, he's got the back of the occipital bone, and he puts his forearms in the collarbone to prise up on it. And by doing that, Boss is forced to open the thing. That's 94. Whenever George fought Carlos Condit from somewhere in the late 90s or the early 2000s to there, everybody stopped doing the can opener. Why? Because Boss here, although he didn't know it at the time, people would rotate their hips and attack the armbar. Right, Rich? So we stopped doing the can opener, because when my 2 hands are on the back of your head, my arm is now in play for you to rotate your hips and attack my arm. So that started to become the counter. So nobody did a can openers. Danaher and George, and the way George told it to me many years ago, he was like, I went to fight Condit, and Danaher said, well, we'll use the can opener. And George is like, oh, no, we can't do the can opener. You will get armbarred. And Danaher's take at the time was, we don't stop doing things because something is available. Always in martial arts, something is available. We just shut down that thing. And that's when centering your hips in the guard, which is so principled now, became a part of that element. When George went back to the can opener, because all he did was lock away Condit's hips, the can opener still worked. If the danger was the armbar, what creates the armbar? The swivel of the hips. Stop the swivel of the hips will stop the armbar. Can opener works again, right? But all of that history, it goes right back to here. And here's Boss going, all I know is my spine hurts, and it'll hurt less if I open my legs. Wild, right?
What's old is new again.
Yeah. And then, somebody will find, and does have, high-level guys have tricks to get their hips back out and the arm bars back in play, right? This is the game. Should we roll?
Let's roll.
So clearly Boss is in trouble. Also back in the day, look at Boss's straight open legs. He got past, obviously. The side can see, actually freeze there. Freeze, yeah. Look at the forearm in the neck. Nobody would ever do that now, but that was so normal. But not nobody. Sorry, that's untrue. You will not see that on any regular basis in any modern fighting. And what they were doing back in the day was they would grip the shoulder, and then forearm against the face, and use that to sort of get up high. But that now is the creating of that space.
Yeah.
Allowed the guy on top to do things. But now the creating of that space just gives the guy on the bottom too much chance to respond.
Yeah, there's too much space there.
Yeah. But then back then, and this is really cool. Let's watch one of these pancrase fights every week. Back then, space was just plentiful. There was space all the time. Like nobody, it just wasn't so known that space was too chaotic. So you'll watch it in this fight, this very short fight, but you'll see it. There's always space present between the fighters. Because it's old, right? Look at all that space, Rich.
Yeah.
The left hip drive, even there, nobody would ever leave the gap between their hips and Boss, but he traps the arm. Boss, and so that forearm. Oh, I love these overhead shots. They're these old pancrase Lucky Strike overhead shots. Look how cool that looks.
I just noticed that there was a Lucky Strike there.
Yeah. So again, the right knee stuck in Boss's right hip. That's sort of helpful. That's blue belt helpful, right? That's two white belts that are pretty good. They've been training for 5 months, kind of helpful. But nobody's ever gonna fight in this position with that much gap. Although because of the difference, so Rich is a brown belt, Mallory's a white belt. Rich, you could choose to fight Mallory this way if you wanted to. Right?
Yeah.
And in doing so, now you trap Boss's right arm underneath, and that was the trap. He was just so much better than him in this spot. But I love that overhead view. But forearm in the face. What's this arm even doing? What's he even doing with it? Today, the danger of that space is just, it's too dangerous for all parties involved. So nobody wants it. But now same kind of thing. Now, and there's Boss holding on. But again, see that grip too, that under the arm grip, that's still there. People it's not popular. It's not, But look, and then Boss that scarf, that's old school judo. He 100%, and then he's going to attack this arm, which he'll put under his leg. Actually, we saw, so pause that for a second. When he takes the arm, a high level guy will put that under his leg and submit it. I actually just commentated a fight where a girl in Amsterdam did that a few weeks ago.
I thought I saw that. I saw that position recently.
Yeah, you're starting to see it. It's interesting because now, see where his forearm and his elbow is? The modern version of that is just shoulder pressure, that chin. Because if you see Boss is kind of looking at us, that usually today would be done by the arm underneath and the left shoulder driving that chin across. But here, it's the same result, but just too much space, according to today's thinking. Isn't it cool to look back at these things?
It's so much you're seeing that's just, just like you said, no one would do this, but that was the method of the day. That was kind of, and I think it's a good point you bring up is that, this is a young Boss. We're only familiar with, his success and everything, but everybody started from somewhere. Everybody's learning literally the ropes here as we go along.
If you talk to Boss too, he lost a couple of fights early, and then he never lost for 24, 23 or 22 or 23 fights. And Boss is so smart and he's so interesting to talk to, and it's just such an honest, easy to grasp way of thinking. He's like, at the beginning, I had to learn, and then a couple of key losses were important for me to understand the gap, and then I just worked super hard to fill it. and then I never lost again. Like if you hear it from Boss, it's very simple, you know. But yeah, it's so cool. Now, you know, Rich, and I know you're still working with the roster and the matches on Bellator. On the undercards, even now, when you've got a 3-0 guy against a 2-1 guy, do you see people that are somewhat rudimentary in an area still, but certainly not as rudimentary as 10 and 12 years ago?
Yeah, no, you're right. That's absolutely the case. You know, guys are still maybe not so technically sound at that young stage, but as you see here, right, going back, I mean, these guys are legends, but back in the day, yeah, it was the Boss looks at this and he's like, man, I had so much to learn. And yeah, the game's evolved, right? The level and the bar has been raised, and but guys still need to yeah, we're still seeing a lot of holes there, you know, where guys are not, you have to be technical these days, you know, you have to have it all, man. If you want to be competitive and elite, you got to be technical and you got to be a good athlete. You know, it's very difficult, yeah, to be an elite fighter.
Yeah. If we do this every week or two and we look at some of these in 97 and stuff, what's his name? Nate Marquardt, when he was young and he came in, old Nate Marquardt, King of Pancrase Nate, and Boss at fight number 8 and 9 and stuff, we'll look at them and go, you know, they weren't so technical, but they were the most up-to-date technical. Like they were the iPhone 6, right?
Yeah.
Like, just because when we look back at an iPhone 6, we're like, oh my God, look at like how non-modern this is. But at the time, it was the very front end of it. Right. And Boss was still learning according to his own, you know, he hadn't done much wrestling or jiu-jitsu at all at this stage. But later when we see some of these guys, they were the highest level, innovative, modern version of it. But in retrospect, the most modern Nate Marquardt in 2002 compared to undercard guys that will fight on Bellator in Ireland this weekend, still completely different. Yeah. Wide range. So crazy.
Yeah, agree. Great point.
This sort of reaching and like and everybody's trying, like there's so much.
Just being so flat on his back, you know, like that, and not trying to get to his side, get an underhook. I mean, obviously he learned very quickly. I'm sure Boss definitely knows his groundwork and his ground game now, but very interesting to see him in the beginning. These are the same mistakes I think a lot of guys make, right?
Yeah, and there's a knee bar.
Yeah.
And even just stepping over and attacking. So there's the knee bar, and I think that is something about a lost point. I forget how some of these things went. But was that the end? Was that submission? No. So there was something, you lose a point in these really early ones, even when you went under the ropes and you grabbed the rope as an escape. You were
allowed X amount of escapes.
Yeah.
With the early rules.
Yeah, which is crazy.
Yeah.
But there's now Boss attacking a guillotine.
Yeah.
And he gets him. Yeah.
But for those that aren't familiar with the rules, like you see him throw a slap. Couldn't punch. You couldn't punch someone in the head. You have to slap them. Had to be open hand.
Right. Notice the lack of gloves.
Yeah.
So back here, they called this so I just go back, see if it's a knee that brings him down. But they call this, the record books call this knee KO, knee to the body. And there's a kick to the body.
Yeah.
And even though Boss, and roll it, Boss grabs, now unless this is a rematch on something, Boss grabs a guillotine, and that is one. And actually rolling to the top with a guillotine like that is, where is it? This is Suzuki. Did he fight him again? No. So they just ignored, I guess maybe they didn't want to say he lost by submission to the Dutch kickboxer. Boss.
No one else. Boss. Anyone else here lip shot when he kicked? You know.
Yeah. No kidding. Which, to be honest, just being off center will do it. Yeah. So there's no other fight in '95 of the two of them, eh? God, he fought so much in '94. Let me see. Maurice Smith, Frank Shamrock. Oh, yes. Submission, guillotine, choke. So this is 95. So this is Boss. This is 95. So this is the rematch, and Boss gets the submission. Now, bear in mind, Boss had lost to Ken Shamrock by submission. He had lost to, twice by submission. He had lost to Funaki by toe hold. And Boss actually told me that once he had lost enough by submission, he learned enough to then later become a submission guy. And they did credit him with that submission. And to be honest, although, he's on his back during that period, it was a completely different strategy, a completely different belief system than today, fighting with all that space and being so reactive. That in fact, that guillotine, to a kind of a guard and then rolling to the top position. He did it with straight legs, but the guillotine from guard rolling to mounted guillotine, to this day, that's one of the more popular submission attempts you see in fighting.
Yeah.
And I actually have a question, and this will be to you, Rich. Does you're obviously in your pancrase rules, you don't have any gloves. Does that help you more with jiu-jitsu, or do you think it's hindering because everybody, if you're modern MMA, you're going to have gloves on. No gloves, does that help you more?
Well, a good defense, like guys that are veterans, if someone has your back, the gloves actually, you start gripping the gloves, and the gloves, it's harder to choke somebody out with gloves on. So actually having just the naked hands, in a way is more beneficial for subs. Guys start grabbing those gloves. It's tough. Like guys that aren't even high level jiu-jitsu guys, they just have enough experience in the gym learning how to defend chokes, and they're like, put gloves on a guy, and once I go 2-on-1, or they can start. They feel comfortable when they can start controlling the gloves. Just to comment on just watching this and just thinking back in the day, these guys having this opportunity to learn. This is kind of like the entryway into MMA, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Boss went from he didn't go from pure kickboxing directly into MMA. He had all this pancrase experience, right? Along with these other guys. So I'm curious, it just makes me wonder, what would it be like today to have this kind of middle ground, this entryway?
Yeah.
Into the game?
So I found this glove just on the ground. This is a common thing that you see. Like, at the end of a baseball bat, there's like that thing. Whatever they call that thing. This is that, right? When for good and for bad, this can stop me when I'm trying to submit you. And what Rich was just saying, 2-on-1, like it's hard for me to escape that because the grip of that has closed and stopped here like the end of a baseball bat. So there's elements like that are in play. I commentate Jorge's bare knuckle MMA, and we see a lot of that. This thing is a lot easier to get into a greasy neck when it doesn't have this thing on it.
Yeah, for sure. So,
Rich, for some guys, you see some of these young guys. For some of these young guys, there's some version of amateur MMA that kind of works this way for them. Padded things, or no knees and elbows, or some of that to some degree helps these guys a little.
Yeah, for sure. It was, pancrase. I believe even the modern pancrase is, the modern organization. It's all MMA, right? I mean, the original pancrase sport is gone, right? Pancrase still around as an organization, from my understanding, it's just pure MMA. So this environment, this platform, this proving, whatever you want to call it, I'm just curious if they still use it. As I mentioned earlier, I think this would be pretty fun for some of the older guys, because obviously the older you get, their biggest concern is taking all that head trauma, right? And hitting the head. So would people still want to see some of the legends do this thing, because pro wrestling versus MMA, right? Essentially. So, or martial artists versus pro wrestlers, right? Because Funaki, pro wrestler.
Suzuki.
Suzuki, Funaki, all these guys, pro wrestling world, and then Boss coming in from the martial arts world as a Dutch kickboxer, right? So, would people want to see that? I don't know. There's such an appetite for violence right?
Mhm.
At all? Would watering it down still make it, would you want to see you know, an older but still in shape, obviously, MMA guy against
Yeah.
another athlete that, I don't know. I'm just throwing it
I
out there.
think, yeah.
Because I'm thinking pancreas is gone, right? We're like looking at a time
Yeah.
where when this
But the
exists.
sport of
Oh,
pancration still exists. The
yeah,
sport, the competitive martial arts contest of pancration, which when we did, a few weeks back, we talked about the Olympics, and the original Olympics had pancration, which is, striking with grappling in a gi. Now, I commentated the pancration world championships in Russia in '94 as part of the World Combat Games, and it was actually really cool. The hands were padded, head kicks were allowed. I don't know if you could punch. I don't think you would punch the head, but you could kick the head, and there were some kick knockouts.
yeah.
And people find those weird sometimes, but they're not as weird as you think. Like if you can't elbow straight down, and you can't kick a downed opponent, what's the difference between that or not being able to punch or kick in certain things? It's just rule sets that are crazy.
Yeah.
Somebody was like, hey, there's only 7 viewers. Now there's lots and lots of viewers. We're just on many different platforms. So I don't know where you're watching it, but the UFC, and maybe on one of the platforms, probably mine. But no, the UFC is not shadow banned us. There's lots of people watching in lots of different places. But yeah, like I wonder, you'd have to change the name because it would be hard to get an American audience to even know what a pancration is. But if you could find a Legends League where Mark Coleman at his age now,
Yeah.
sober, could fight open-handed against Hoist, the weight difference is very
Yeah,
big.
and it just got me thinking,
Right.
this platform is gone, but could it still be relevant and useful today?
Ooh, good question right here.
Yeah. Could gi MMA make a comeback? Wouldn't be the weirdest thing in the world to see somebody start being successful, if you're even allowed. Rich, are you allowed in Bellator
No,
to fight
you're not.
Mickey? No, you're not. That's right. I don't know where you would be.
You can't wear a gi, no wrestling shoes, a lot of the things we saw early on.
Early UFC.
You know that some guys would prefer the pants, like Hoist.
Yeah.
Mhm.
In Japan, he wore the pants. I know Eddie Bravo was always a big fan of the gi pants, right? He would compete in no gi comp because he felt he could get the grip and whatnot.
Yeah. Texture.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, this is fun. This is fun going through.
Sambo, can you pull that up again?
Yeah.
Look, with the impact is being felt in the West. They got some of the best fighters in the world. Like this is Russia. We've seen the waves from various countries, come in where they just kind of dominate and it's their moment. Right now, the Russians, we're seeing a lot of, their background being Sambo. It's the impact is being felt. So
Combat Sambo is just MMA with a gi top. Not totally true, but I get your point.
Yeah.
You can strike and grapple and choke and submit, and there's less in much of combat sambo. We do either no striking or limited striking on the ground, and that changes things. Yeah. But the blend of punching and kicking you in the face and then taking you down, trying to take your leg off, that's close.
Yeah. So to answer this, Ryzen does sometimes, if you're referring to they allow the gi. Yeah, they don't have athletic commissions over there.
Yeah, right.
Part of the unified rules here in the States, it prohibits the use of gis, wrestling shoes. Heck, you can't even wear like ankle braces. You can, I don't want to get.
That gets real.
That's another day.
Real quick.
Yeah, but Sambo, the impact. We saw Fedor have some success. Vadim Nemkov. Right, Moldavsky, all these guys grew up in combat sambo. So yeah, a great base, clearly, right?
Yeah, this is Rich. We were chatting about this a little bit today. At what point is martial arts more expression than technique? This we could do a whole. We could explore the three of us and people with us for a whole series of podcasts on this, but the better you get at technique, the more you can express yourself, I think, too.
So, Kara, Matt, we will come back to this for sure, but that is, yeah, something Robin and I and Mallory have dissected. It's fascinating. It really, I mean, that is the art in martial arts, right? That's exactly what that is, that expression. And I think Bruce Lee had a great quote about that, where he says, ultimately martial arts is expressing oneself. That's a crazy fun topic.
Yeah. One thing I think we can sort of say, and we'll come back to that for sure, and it's going to be an ongoing theme, probably always with us, where the art ends and the technical and the tactical and the art aspects of it. But one thing I think that we have seen, if we look back, the way we watched Boss in what turned out to be 8 fights later than we thought, and only 1 year, but in that year he went from being submitted in all of his losses to, I think, being very close to never losing again and submitting a bunch of guys. And that's pretty incredible in 1 year. But the same way we looked at that sort of historic thing, I think if we really spent the time, we could say, a ton about essence and creativity, and then more and more waves of hard technique structure, the structured, thinkers and trainers beat the artist guys. And then when everybody became too structured and that became part of the regular DNA, it's time for the artist guys again. I feel like there's a wave that continues. The more it becomes one way, the more it increases the value of the other over time.
Yeah.
But let's touch on a few other things, and then we'll already be thinking about next week. Oh yeah. So one of you guys, we were talking about before we went into that fight, which was super exhilarating to go back and look at, and it stimulated all kinds of thinking. We were talking about the best gym to train at. What should you train? And Rich, you actually brought this up, culture, environment, and so forth. And we were like, we should probably get into some coach things.
Yeah, this is a good topic. I'll let you guys go first. I'm trying to think of a good coach story. First, let me start by saying coaches are really the most underappreciated people in this whole thing. We see the fight promotions doing very well, right? Thriving right now. I think it's a good time right now. UFC, Bellator, ONE FC, PFL, those organizations are doing very well. Fighters are making more money now than they ever have. I know it's not probably what they want yet, but I mean, come a long way. Guys are making millions of dollars being prize fighters. This was not the case not long ago. So everything is growing except, in my opinion, the gyms and the coaches, So I'll start just by saying that coaches are very underappreciated. There was a tweet going around, this thread that started with Eric Nixick over at Extreme Couture and Brandon Gibson from Jackson Wink, right? And it was it was National Coaches Day, and they were both just chiming in, joking about, it'd be nice if we could get paid on time. It's But overall, my point is, let me just start as we dive into coach stories and talk about coaches, just how underappreciated they are. And so shout out and much respect to the out there. And, I'll let you guys start with some of the stories though.
Yeah, Mal, what about you? You got, because when I was like, let's see if we got a coach story, you were like, I love it.
I think I want to relay the story that Hackelman told us about with Chuck. When we were in Hackelman he told us that he's a registered nurse. He worked in ER, and one of the good things is the relationship between him and Chuck is that they've done everything on a handshake deal. It's been like, hey, I want you in my corner. You train me, you get me ready for this, that, and the other. But the one that he told us that one time he was over in Hawaii, and Chuck was fighting his opponent, and he's right there at the cage. Drop elbows, elbows, elbows. Yeah, cut him open. Cut him. And he's just right there. He's yelling. And Chuck wins. And one of the promoters said, hey, one of the ER guys is busy. Do you think you can help stitch up a fighter? and he says, Hackelman says, yeah, I'll give a hand. And he gets his gloves and he gets the stitch equipment. He goes in there, and the guy who he is going to stitch up is the guy he was just telling Chuck to cut up. And I thought about how awkward that was when 15 minutes ago you were just telling your fighter to just drop elbows on his forehead and completely cut him up. And now he's stitching them up. And I know I can kind of see it being like, normally you're just talking to a guy like, hey, you'll get him next time and everything. But it's probably just a bitter, awkward silence as you just stitch a guy up from the damage you just told your fighter to inflict on it.
But beautiful, right? Like in its weird, odd way. Isn't that amazing?
Just, and I agree with you. So Hackman's such a cool dude. He was very generous with his time that we had him on for another. And just some of the old school stories of just, you go expecting to fight one guy, you end up fighting two, or the guy you're expecting is at 185 and you come in and you look like that guy ain't 185, he's 200. And he looks over Chuck, says, I don't care, let's go ahead and do it. And everything else like that. Guys like to have a million stories, especially quote unquote in the early days of MMA.
Yeah, that's, God, it's something that we've said out loud, and we're all intuitively sort of hesitant to fall into this area. But when you appreciate the past a lot, it's easy to be like these old guys who just, football was way better back in the day. But there is a beauty of these guys traveling around the world. It's like they show up to do the show. You guys got to kick the crap out of each other. I'll wrap his hands, but I can definitely stitch you after. Like, there's a beauty in all of that. There really is. I got for us a hobby story that I like. So it was my last fight. I might have told you this one, Mal. I don't think I told you, Rich, but I know I brought this guy up before, and you've worked with him. Mandel Nallo. We brought him up at one point. So It was my last fight, and I was fight number 2 on the card. I didn't know it was my last fight. I thought I was going to do one more after, but the guy never showed up at the weigh-ins years. So I had a couple fights cancel at the end, which is not uncommon as it's meandering down. But I didn't know it was my last fight, but I knew it was pretty close. And it was Mandel Nallo's first fight. And he was fight number 1, and I was fight number 2. And my coach, Billy, Billy is a whole other story. We'll have him on at some point. Billy is a really great coach, but beyond that, there's something about him where you just want to please him. Like, I don't know what it was, but I just wanted this man to be happy. I wanted to win for him, which was a very odd and beautiful thing. But so I'm there with Billy, and we're getting ready, and everything's going great. And we got it all sorted, and the fight went great. And Mandel's about to fight, and he's super wound up. He's very eager, and I don't think he had amateur fights. He fought with Eamon and George and Rory in the gym, and he's really good, and he was really good then. But he, the experience of fighting, he didn't have it, right? And he's super lit. And then, and he's going out in 15 minutes. The show starts, he's the first guy. And Faraz goes, hey, Mandel, come here, sit down. Hey, Mandel, and he's saying it with a smile because he doesn't want to give him the wrong idea. He goes, get this. Your guy is not here. They found you a different guy. And Mandel kind of looks at him curiously, but he understands that this is sort of that he's being taken on an adventure. He goes, yeah, that's right. Your guy is not here. Instead, they got this other guy, and he's 10 feet tall, and he's big, and he's powerful. He's fast, and he's strong, and he's a black belt in every martial arts. And I fought him 10, 15 years ago, and he defeated me. He's one of the great. That's who they have for you. He's big. Mandel's looking at him like this, and then he stops. He goes, nah, just kidding. They got the same guy for you. and then kind of Mandel sits and he's sort of chill and everything. And actually, he was fighting a friend of mine, actually. And Mandel kind of goes out, and Mandel fights, bam, 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 head kick, bam, bam, fighting. And he gets the guy, gets fence, he gets him hurt, and he gets him out of there. And then they call my name. Hey, Robin, you're up next. And there was something about that whole exchange I found curious, and it was distracting to me. It definitely helped me. I thought it was one of my best performances. I won. It was all good. Later, I go back and it was cool too because George was there and Rory was there and all these guys. And it's cool to have. And so I go back after and I go, Russ, what? I just saw this whole thing and I was really curious. And he said, yeah, he said he was just so lit. He's like, he's so much better than anyone he's going to fight at this stage. But I'm just so worried, like, that if he burnt himself out and suddenly he realized he was out of breath and he was, panic, like, he was just like, I just had to take him from here and bring him down to here.
Bring it down
and
a
I
little
said,
bit,
yeah. And I said, is that like a story you've used before? And he kind of smiled. He goes, maybe. But it was like a very specific mechanism to kind of like regulate him. And it was really cool, actually. It was one of the more interesting things that I've seen. I've been around in the backs for my fights, for friends' fights, for whatever, lots and lots of times. That was a really interesting one because it was so specifically designed to get him to a different spot. And it worked. And actually then Faraz even finished this like this. He was like, you saw that fight. He's like, he had that kid hurt and he had him out of there in 2 minutes. He goes, even the way it went down, if it took him 3 or 4 and he didn't breathe the whole time, and if he backed away and he hadn't hurt the guy and he took a deep breath and suddenly realized, oh my God, I have nothing left. He said he could lose a fight he should have won. He goes, even with everything, it's still unfold. And so that gave you the insight into understanding just how well he can see what this will all lead to. It was fascinating. To this day, it's still one of the more, and plus it was vital because I was right there and I was right in it and I was fighting too. But it was just so interesting to me. And his point at the end, like, even though we accomplished our goal, he still didn't fight the way we would have wanted him to, and he was still at risk of it going bad, right?
That's
so
to
neat.
be able to see that, that's really cool. One of the things I always thought about is that, let's say, for example, you've got a coach there who's got 3 fighters in the event. A lot of times these guys are running back and forth, and the fighter, if they win or lose, let's say that things go wrong, they lose. The fighter, they lose and they deal with that. But the coach, he feels and experiences every loss personally as the fighter does. Think about that. If you have 3 fighters in the show and all 3 out and they lose, they get submitted, they get knocked out, you start to question yourself as a coach that, like, wait a minute, am I doing this thing right? Because my 3 guys, lost. While the individual fighter, yep, I got this loss on my record. Okay, I know what to do. I'm going to come back stronger. But now the coaches deal with all 3 of those at the same time.
Yeah. Like I said earlier, underappreciated, man. People don't really think about what the coaches go through. I'll share a quick some thoughts here on coaching, and something interesting I've seen develop a lot lately. It's the father-son dynamic. With now we're at that point where the game is, we're 20 plus years into it. Now the guys we saw that used to fight, they have kids that are grown and are fighting. And I've talked to a few of them. I've had the pleasure of working with a few of them, Antonio McKee being one. Obviously, AJ is doing his thing. That's truly a success story right there. There's Chris and Lucas Brennan, amongst others. So, just interesting to see that dynamic now that for a lot of these coaches, their kids are of age and are
Wonder Boy and his dad.
Wonder Boy and his dad. Other Canadians, Jordan and Lee. Ian, right? So it's now this era where the kids are growing up on the mat with their dads, and those are some of the good feel-good success stories. It can also turn out to be really bad. I mean, a crazy stat that I heard not that long ago was like all these deaths in boxing. There's like a crazy percentage of them where the father's in the corner, and he won't do the right thing, or kind of living through the kid, whatever it may be. I found that stat to be like
that's
very disheartening, but also interesting how, like I said, it's, you would think having family in the corner or, in charge of your training and coaching I guess it's not always a good thing, but I just wanted to mention those success stories that I witnessed very closely, seeing AJ McKee go from pro.
Lance Gibson.
Lance and Lance Jr. They're now, like I said, we're coming of this. We're coming into this era where these OGs, their kids, and I'm sure there'll be more. Hoyce and Connery. There's several, and AJ obviously stands out as he's one of the best guys in the world, if not the best guy in the world, and just coming off that huge win. I think Lucas has a bright future ahead of him if he keeps doing his
Yeah.
thing. And I'm sure there's several others
Yeah.
that we haven't touched on. Lance Jr., where you're like, man, these kids are going to be.
Yeah. People don't realize what an OG the Lance Senior is, man. If you're from Canada, you do. If you're from Canada and kind of came up on consuming these guys, Senior is legit, like, and it's so cool. Any of these ones, and Lee too. Any of these ones you mentioned, it's a weird one. Like, we should get some of these guys on at some point because this is a really interesting topic. If they'll talk, I think, to us. The ones we've mentioned are people we know well, and getting into that aspect of, like, the relationship. I've talked to Antonio about this too, but that Antonio's a different communicator, is a different cat. Talking to Lee or Lance about it would be interesting, like how hard can you push them, and how the trust is a deep part, because who do you trust more than your dad, right? And that's a great thing. But the weird, creepy, uncomfortable example of point you made too, Rich, is the percentage of deaths in the ring where the dad was in the corner. The trust you had for each other might have been a weird dynamic. It's not something you want to think about too deeply, because you don't have the answers to that, right? We don't have them, nothing but theory, right?
Super complex, and we certainly don't want to be respectful to those families. But his father, it's like we're now in that era because our sport is so much younger than boxing. This has been around in boxing for a long time, right? Because boxing's existed for over 100 years, but MMA as we know it being so relatively new, now we're starting to see
second generation
guys we know. The next gen is here, and
one other thing is
very interesting to me
that I wanted to get on is that Random Admin kind of still the thunder. Not only the father-son dynamic, but there's brothers. I just have in mind Clay Guida come there and his brother giving him the famous slap before this. But there's also husband and wife dynamics too, which is it's
Melendez,
Smiling Sam, one of his wife is.
His wife's in his corner. Although if you talk to them, although she is his corner, she is not his coach. He is sort of his head coach, and she is there because he trusts her so deeply, and he does believe in what she sees. It's a different dynamic.
But it's there.
Very interesting. Austin and Paige,
Ray and Colby. Ray Daniels and Colby.
True. True. Very interesting. We can explore these guys. Should we wrap it up and then keep these two for next week? These are a little more philosophical, but we do philosophy pretty well, I think. We'll take any questions if anyone's got any specific questions or thoughts. Send them in the next 2 minutes. Otherwise, what are you guys looking at this week? What do you got going on?
Bellator Dublin.
Mel, how was your trip? How was the sport martial arts trip?
It was good. It was good to see everyone. We had I think I mentioned on the podcast last week, we've got Canada, America, we had Mexico, a lot of South American countries, but of course we were missing Europe. It was good just to see people in person again. And for me this weekend, I was just going to say, I'm looking forward to watching. There's Bellator on, there's UFC on. I forgot, I'm traveling for Ross's wedding this week. Ross Levine is getting married.
Ross Levine,
I'm going to Boston for that. So
awesome.
I will have to watch on replay everything.
Awesome. Rich, you were talking about your buddy training for the Masters.
Worlds. We trained this morning. Couple more sessions this week, and then that's next weekend in Vegas.
Awesome. What is he, black belt?
Yeah, so he'll be black belt. I want to say I forget the exact divisions, like Master 3.
How old is he?
He's under 40. I think he's
then Masters 2, I think.
2? Is it 2? Yeah.
Yeah, 35, and then I think it's Masters 2.
Then
you get up to senior. You get up to senior after 40. I think at least at one point. I would be like senior 3 now.
Thanks for asking. So that's been fun. As I mentioned last week, to be a part of helping somebody at this age where typically things you kind of lose that unless I guess you're playing softball or something which I don't plan on doing anytime soon. But it's still cool to have something to prepare for and I'm sure we'll get into it next week, was one of the topics, right? The why and the goal setting. So to be continued.
Yeah, actually, we'll bring up that question for you about next week about that. This is a really great question. I don't think we have an answer for it today, but does a great coach and a good fighter win or lose to a good fighter to a great fighter and a good coach?
Question.
So
Question.
there's so many variables to that it's sort of difficult, but I've started to look at good questions like this as conversation starters now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because the answer to this isn't yes or no at all. The answer to this is, what's a great coach? What's a good fighter?
Right.
How does one pull the other? Which of the dynamics? If the super great coach and a coach who's, you know, on heroin versus a fighter who is a black belt and a fighter who is a white belt, you know,
there's some coaches I know, great, you know, they're super technically proficient and sound and can break shit down for you. And there's others I know that have had a ton of success that get you ready to fight mentally. You know what I'm saying? They are master motivators. They create and instill this confidence. You know, like you will follow that man to battle and do whatever it takes. You know, a leader of men, so to speak. And then there's these other guys that are like so master technicians, right? Like, oh, I can tell you everything about this position and that position, but he ain't going to get you ready and fired up to fight. So anyways, I don't want to go down
that's a topic for another day, but a great one. Some people categorize them as like a weaponsmith and a sergeant, you know, like that. This guy will be there to like make sure your guns are sharp, your armor is good, you've got your bayonet, like, you know, and this guy will lead you. But they're both important. And in really great scenarios, you know, you have both. And if you have both, they both make each other better. Brandon Gibson at one time may have been more a weaponsmith than today, where he's a strategist. You know, Mike Brown, we'll get Mike Brown on sometime too. He's so cool to chat, and he only chats when it's nerdy stuff. He's not as interested unless it's as nerdy as we're going. But Mike Brown, wherever he was on that spectrum of you know, a sword sharpener to leader of men, he's blended those things into each other. So it's really interesting. Yeah, that's a cool topic for another day too. You know. Yep. Well, thanks, guys. Like, it's a real pleasure. I got. Maybe you guys can help me here. I'm chatting about tonight on Sports Center about Usman and Covington. And so I'm always trying to look for something that's truthful and or meaningful, but not the same old. That and not, you know. And so there's something when I was looking at those last four knockouts, or 3 knockouts in his last 4 fights, which we talked about earlier. Why did they take place, or how did they take place? And our simple answer is he's improved his striking under coach. Who is it?
I can't remember. Oh man.
From Denver.
He moved to Denver. I think he was with Trevor Whitman.
Yeah. And so an easy answer that you say on SportsCenter in a suit, you know, under the tutelage of Trevor Whitman, he's improved his striking. That actually doesn't mean anything, right? That's just, you know, that's not true. That is true, but we haven't said anything valuable that somebody on Twitter couldn't say. But when I was looking at it and trying to find something meaningful in there, the thing I found that it was in common with all 3 of these knockouts, they all happen sort of in interruption type settings where we're both throwing and Usman is seeing and inviting and interrupting. So it's not like set something up, bam, you're done. Something is happening in the chaos, and in creating the chaos, he catches the thing.
Yeah.
And the issue about that is, so we have 3 examples in the last 4 fights when in what we will call firefights, as a simple way to put it, he landed the meaningful punches and won. Over time, if that happens too much, you get too confident in it.
Start to fall in love with your striking.
Yeah.
Gamble on 100 hands in a row and you win 100, you're sure you're always going to win.
Right.
Inevitably, finding faith in your ability to win in the gamble is not viable forever. Eventually you get knocked out, but you do it more, the more it works, which makes you more at risk of being knocked out. So I'm trying to figure out how to make that make sense to a regular mainstream sports audience tonight on Sports Center.
If anyone can, it's you, buddy.
This is true. You take the complex and make it simple.
Yeah, it's a fascinating matchup. I'm certainly looking forward to it. Colby's been a little quiet, huh?
That's what I was gonna mention for Colby. For the Colby verse, he's been a lot more quiet, and I do believe you had a lot more emotion between the two guys.
Yeah.
From last fight, now it's kind of one guy has the win over the other, and there's a little bit of advantage there with that. But I still believe that this is probably going to be more fireworks than last time. Because rematch is always different.
Yeah. It'll be fun. It'll be a fun fight. And with no disrespect to that fight, and I told them when they were asking me about what to chat about tonight that I also wanted to chat about Chandler and Gaethje. That's actually, to me, like that, just from a pure, I am fascinated by these two martial artists, and I want to see them fight. And I don't want to talk during it, and I don't want to type, and I don't want to be on Twitter. I just want to watch them fight. That one, I just want to see Michael fight that guy. And I remember sitting in 2013 and 14 with my buddy Ramdeen, doing sort of television style podcasts, open-ended things. And those were those guys, and Ben Henderson and this would be earlier, but Pettis and stuff. There were these guys in the world that were outside of the UFC that you knew could beat all the guys in the UFC, and these were two of them. Alvarez, of course, was one too, and he became the champion. Right? This sort of thing was sort of an interesting thing, But I want to watch those guys fight. I'm excited to watch those two guys fight.
And you got a rematch with Rose and Lee as well, which stole the show last time, in my opinion.
Yep. I don't want to be negative, but I actually don't enjoy the television program of that all that much anymore. And I'm not being a homer. I'm gainfully employed covering both things, but I'll enjoy Bellator programs more sometimes than the big glitzy one. But it's just a personal preference, and it's just a television program. It's not about the fights. You're not going to have a more fun fight going on than Chandler and Gaethje. That's good times. That's good times.
Yeah.
Well, let's sign off, and then let's hang out for 5 or 10 minutes. And thanks for hanging, guys. It's such a pleasure.
Always, and thank you, sir.
And thanks to everybody who watches us. Thanks for Black Belt Magazine. You were one of the reasons we wanted to do this.
Thanks, everybody.
End broadcast. Click.